The tightening and finishing process will proceed from the outside of the enclosure to the inside and from the edges to the center. When one screw or nut is tightened, there may be an effect on another part of the cage, so it is important that tightening be gradual and gentle. Do not over-tighten screws and nuts, especially the locking nuts with nylon inserts, because loosening them is very hard to do. If at any point in the tightening process the two parts being tightened together do not line up or cannot move slightly, manipulate the panels around those parts until the connection point is correctly aligned. Step 1. Tighten the screws at the tops of the wall panels outside the cage, starting with the screws at the bottom of the roof panels and then the screws at the bottom of the gables. Step 2. Move inside the cage and tighten all the screws in the threaded inserts at the top of the wall panels. Step 3. Tighten the bolts holding the adjacent flanges of the roof gables together inside the cage. Step 4. Tighten the screws connecting the angle brackets to the gables. 2 people are needed to tighten the bolts holding the angle bracket onto the gable. The person inside the enclosure will secure the locking nut with a 7/16" wrench and simultaneously push the angle bracket up so that the edge of the roof panel is tight to the top of the gable. The other person will use a screwdriver to tighten the screw from outside the enclosure. Tighten the bolts just enough to hold the edge of the roof panels and the angle brackets in this snug position. Step 5. Tighten the bolts connecting the stabilizer brackets to the bottoms of the roof braces just tight enough that the screw and locking nut cannot be rotated with fingers. Step 6. Use a 7/16" wrench to tighten the hex nuts on the 4-inch roof tightening bolts on the underside of the roof rafters. Tighten just enough so that the hex nut cannot be easily loosened with your fingers. The tightening bolts pass through the roof peaks where there is a visible gap between them. You should not be able to see any bend in the roof peak when these bolts are tightened. Move back outside the cage and inspect the hardware in the same order as the tightening sequence. If the fasteners are now loose, tighten them again. Work your way through the tightening and inspection sequence a few times until all the fasteners are snug and tight. The last step is to thread a second non-locking hex nut onto the 4-inch roof tightening bolts and tighten them up against the hex nut that is already in place and tight. This will lock the hex nuts in place. The assembly of your rectangular Suncatcher enclosure is now complete. You can move on to install accessories such as safety catches, feeding watering systems, perches, or catwalks.